Welcome, everyone. We're so excited you're here. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. As you're entering, we'd love for you to put your name in the chat and the location you're tuning in from, and maybe either your top strength or a character strength you're using today. Welcome, everyone. Nice. Welcome, Amanda and Aaron. Wow, I don't know if everyone's seeing. We've got a lot of people from everywhere today. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get us started today, but please keep sharing in the chat. We love to see this. My name is Alicia Powers. I'm the Director of Instructional Design with VIA Institute on Character, and I'm very honored today to have the privilege to introduce Dr. Jillian Copley, who is VIA's President and Chief Programs and Services Officer. Jillian.
Oh, thanks so much, Alicia, and welcome everyone. We're just couldn't be happier to see you all here, and I am so excited for this conversation. It is always genuinely heartening to me to see so many people around the world who are interested in knowing more about who they are at their best and how they can help others do the same. And particularly with regard to this conversation today, when we're facing challenges, how do we dig deep and find the best in ourselves and really promote that in others to create strengths-based solutions to the problems we face? Clearly, in our minds, it has never been more important. Our workplaces, we know, when they are imbued with strengths, can become places not only of performance, but well-being. And our experts today are going to share with you some really practical strategies based on their beautiful portfolios of work and their experiences, so that you can take them away and use them tomorrow. You know, people are frequently very interested in the idea of strengths-based approaches. But the question is always, well, how do I make that happen? How do I make it come alive? What can I do moment to moment? And again, our experts today are going to have some fantastic answers for those questions. We're going to do things in the sense that we're actually just inviting these three people who I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment to be in conversation amongst themselves. And we're going to be kind of fishbowling in on their wise conversation. And then we'll do that for about 30 minutes. And then we'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. We are so grateful for your engagement in terms of the questions you submitted. We got about 400 questions from folks participating today. And we tried to condense those to a few that'll speak to a lot of those items that were suggested. And we'll spend the last part of our time together doing that. And then Alicia will wrap us up and share some opportunities as well as a tool we'd like to send you home with today. So with all of that in mind, it is my deep, deep pleasure and great gratefulness to be able to introduce you our three conversants today. First of all, we have Anne Wallace, and Dr. Wallace is a clinical psychologist who has devoted the last 20 years of her expertise and energy to helping individuals and organizations really be at their best through the utilization of strengths. She is an expert in cultivating and developing leaders in the workplace, as well as cultivating workplaces that simultaneously support the highest performance and well-being for everyone involved. I'm also delighted to welcome Joe Moorman. Joe has been an executive with a number of high-profile and important nonprofits. He currently is at the University of Pennsylvania, where he is Senior Director of Impact Ed. And I'm very happy to share that I've known Joe for a long time, as he was one of the pivotal and essential leaders that got the strengths-based workplace work off the ground, Mayerson Academy, before it merged with VIA. So we're just delighted to have them both. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jane Anderson. Some of you who've joined us for webinars before have met Jane, and you will welcome her, I'm sure, as a warm and wise voice in this conversation. Jane is the president of Strengths-Based Living and the author of 30 Days of Character. She's worked with organizations large and small across the country. And I think you'll see in each one of these folks how they are imbued with a strengths-based approach, even as they speak with you and speak together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to talk about how, again, they are transforming challenges through a strengths-based approach in workplaces with their clients and partners they work with. So thanks so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Jillian, for that warm and wonderful introduction, and welcome everyone. It's so good to see so many faces, new and unfamiliar and unfamiliar. So we decided to think about this topic from three different perspectives. One is the perspective of individuals, two is the perspective of teams, and three is the perspective of leaders. And we thought we'd start with individuals. So the question that we're starting it with is what kinds of challenges do individuals who wish to create change for themselves or their workplaces? What kinds of challenges do these people face? So that's part one. Part two is how have we each, the three of us, approached working with these people in a strength-based way? So in particular, we'll share some examples, some real world examples of challenges. We'll share some of the tools and resources that we've offered and a little bit about the outcomes that we've seen. So having said that, Anne, would you like to kick off the conversation for us?
Yeah, Jane, thanks. I'd be happy to. So, when we think of individuals, I have to say, the first thing that came to mind for me was recently I was working with a client. He was a sales executive in the tech sector and was wanting to make a change because, well, he had actually recently made a change. He was in a new role at a new organization and was being mentored by someone outside of the organization and how to do sales, even though he was a senior sales executive, and was feeling pretty uncomfortable with everything and just really unsure about was he in the right place? Could he do the job? Like, things that had come naturally to him for a long time, he was really uncertain about. And so, as part of coaching, he completed the strength survey, and we started unpacking that. And then actually, there's a great exercise within the VIA learning pathway called What's Your Why? And really gets into kind of, not only what are my strengths, but it's kind of how do I like to use them, right? What's helpful for me about using them? And as part of kind of going through this process of taking the survey, of kind of going through this exercise, we came up with his own philosophy of sales. And he realized that actually he didn't like the kind of sales he was being mentored to do. He liked the kind of sales which was kind of an aggressive approach, kind of, a lot of cold calling. He liked relationship building when it came to sales. Like that's what was passionate for him. That's what he cared about. He wanted to solve people's problems as a salesperson. And so he was able to take that kind of newfound self-awareness and kind of ownership of that and actually went to his CEO and they talked through and he shifted direction and within the next couple of months made some pretty significant shifts that were really powerful and positive for him. So that it just to me is like when you think of just some of the strategies that are out there that just dig into not only kind of who am I and what are my strengths, but kind of where does that lead me with my purpose? Just so powerful. So I don't know, Joe, what would you add?
Thanks, Sam. I'm glad to be here, everybody. So thinking about this question of challenges that individuals are facing, the thing that I'm always thinking about is a pretty common topic in this space, which is around engagement. So the extent to which folks feel like they're really connected to the work that they're doing, they find energy and purpose in it. There are a lot of dimensions to engagement. A lot of people are probably familiar with the Gallup research that comes out every year about the level of engagement in workplaces, particularly in the United States. It's a pretty commonly cited statistic, and generally we're not doing as great as we'd like to be doing in that area. Some of the organizations I've had the opportunity to work with, I've mostly worked with nonprofit organizations, but I've also worked with city government agencies. And I found, in particular with that latter group of city government agencies, there is a tends to be a little bit more of a challenge oftentimes with engagement, kind of thinking about how the day-to-day work and the tasks actually align with or connect to a person's strengths, their skills, their passions, the things that they care about. I think there's sort of a tension here, and like, does a job always have to be a passion or a purpose, or can a job just kind of be a job? I think there's a whole world to kind of unpack there. However, I have found that the practice of job crafting can be a really effective way to help folks better align the components of their jobs with their top strengths. So there's actually an activity in the workplaces at their best um, uh, course as well that focuses on helping people kind of map out their day-to-day tasks to actually assess their level of engagement and enjoyment with those different tasks, and then to work on how to bring different top character strengths in to just shift their whole experience with that task, or to think about how they can even change the way they distribute their time. So it's not a method that can solve every engagement problem, but sometimes there are small shifts that can make a real difference. And I think that's a great place to start, is just thinking about on a weekly basis, even what is the one thing that you least look forward to doing, or maybe isn't as aligned to your strengths, and how could you maybe take a different approach to by integrating one of your signature strengths into that task to do it in a new way. Or on the converse, what's the thing that you find the most joy in and the most energy in, that feels most aligned to your strengths, and how could you actually carve out time to spend more time on tasks like that? So that's been a practice I found really effective, I think, across spaces, but I mentioned in particular, I saw a lot of application working with city government agencies.
Joe, I have a question about that because I also love like job crafting, and I'm just wondering, like, when I just noticed, like, what do you see? Like, where's the magic in that? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what do you see change or shift as people are going through that process?
I think sometimes, especially if you've been in a job for a while, you sort of get into a rhythm where this is just kind of how it is. This is how I spend my time. And there are a lot of factors that can lead to that, certainly. And sometimes, certainly, if you're trying to get into the practice of job crafting, having support from a manager is pretty essential. A lot of folks aren't in a position to be able to just drastically change where they're spending their time in their work without having support and having that buy-in from a manager. But I think just kind of unlocking this sense of what actually could be possible. Like, it doesn't have to necessarily be this way on a day-to-day basis. It even, like I said, with a small shift, thinking about how maybe you're someone who really, I mean, a common example is some folks love Excel, they love spreadsheets, they love getting the numbers and the details. Some people really don't enjoy that. But if you're someone who maybe doesn't necessarily enjoy that, but you're really high in the strength of creativity, or really high in the strength of appreciation of beauty and excellence, is there a way for you to bring one of those strengths in to, say, develop a really beautiful design in a spreadsheet that has never existed before in your organization that could really help accelerate the quality of the work? Or is there a new way or a new approach that someone hasn't tried yet where you can bring that creativity in? It's just a small shift, but it can really change your experience pretty dramatically. But I think it's the kind of this unlocking of like, actually, it doesn't have to be exactly the way it is. We have some agency. And having, as I said, support from a manager definitely makes that even more possible.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, loving this conversation. And you said something that really caught for me. You were talking about someone in a new role, and question you asked was, who am I, in this new role? How do I bring my full self to this? And it's kind of a hard question to answer, who am I? But when you think about character strengths, the answer becomes a little bit easier, that we can think about, who we are when we're at our best through these wonderful qualities. So that was one thing. And then Joe, you mentioned engagement and job crafting, and this shift that happens in the approach that we take to work. And these practices are not, we don't have to make over ourselves or our work, right? We can do these adjustments. When I was thinking about individuals and their challenges, I came up with sort of a really different type of challenge. I was working with a team, and this one person came to me and started describing how they were avoiding a team member. And this was due to like clashes and conflicts and frustrations. And this apparently was going on for years, long time. It was well known on the team. they just avoided this person because they could. They didn't have a lot of overlap in their functions. And this person said to me, we're so different. We're so different. I just avoid being, with them as much as possible. And um, when we started working together, their environment was changing a lot. So collaboration was becoming more and more important. The organization was growing quickly and a lot of things were changing. And so that collaboration was really needed. And they were showing up together at the same time, like literally, physically. And so the avoidance, isn't a good strategy at this point anymore. So from a strengths perspective, one of the solutions that I offered, or a practice that I brought, was the simple practice of strength spotting. This is the practice of seeing and valuing other people's strengths and strengths in ourselves. So noticing the top strengths of the other. And through this simple practice, they discovered a shared group of signature strengths, that they shared love of learning and honesty. And this person started to appreciate how these signature strengths that they were so, comfortable with and excited about showed up in other people, and how these contributed in the other person to the work that they did. So appreciating them in a little bit different way. And then the second thing that happened was this person started seeing differences in signature strengths and appreciating those differences. And the takeaway for me was that through this practice of strength spotting, they started to, shift the way they connected with this other person. Literally in the team meetings, they started to identify and name strengths that they saw and actions that were taken. And there was this whole, it was really, it was really neat to see this, not only in the person, but the way the other person responded. And also at the team level, how all of a sudden it seemed to open the possibility that positive change on the team could happen. And so on all these different levels, it was just, again, a simple practice of strength spotting with one person taking the initiative, and this sort of ripple effect that it had within the individuals and as well as the team.
Jane, what a great story. I'll actually just share my own personal example about kind of, because one of the beauties of the strengths work is just that increase in self-awareness, right? Increase of kind of my own self-awareness, and then the awareness of, to that point, the kind of beautiful uniqueness that we all have. And in the last year or so, I've started working with a small group of consultants, and there are two or three of us total. And the first time we hopped on the phone, they have zest in their, as they're among their signature strengths, both of them. And zest is my 24. And I know before I started doing this strengths work, I just would have been irritated. Right? I just would have been like, oh my, and I was like, okay, this is a lot. This is a lot. I'm like, oh, they both have zest, right? In their top 20, in their top signature strengths. And I know it's my 24. So like we were, so I kind of made that known at some point, and we joke about it now. And it helps folks know when I need to dial mine up, or others need to dial them down. So it's that awareness, both collectively and individually, that I think you were sharing. That really is about the power of the work.
Yeah, and I'll add on this topic of conflict. And Jane, I was struck by what you said, like the avoidance piece, and just how common that is in so many workplaces. And a lot of the workshops I've done with character strengths, one of the topics that resonates the most is this topic of feedback, and how do you actually create a culture of feedback in an organization and use character strengths to do that. But on this notion of, kind of building on what you said about strength spotting, Jane, I'm thinking, I've had plenty of experiences that have ended in a really positive place, but at the same time, I've had some that have maybe not gotten all the way to the most positive outcome, but have been to a slightly better place. And what I mean by that is, I think when you actually understand another person's combination of character strengths, it gives you a window into who they are and what makes them tick, so to speak, right? So you got to understand why they are the way they are. And I think sometimes even that understanding, and it's still through a lens of strengths, these are all inherently good things about human beings. It might just be that, in the case you shared, Jane, these were, some people had had overlapping strengths or connecting strengths, but it might be that you have some strengths collisions, like certain strengths are showing up in a way where maybe you're really high in prudence and the person that you're really having conflict with is really high in creativity. And so you're finding yourself at odds in so many different team conversations, for instance. So I've found that in some cases when I've worked with leaders, I've had conversations after a workshop where someone's talked to me about a situation, I will encourage them just to take some time to reflect on, what is that other person's strengths? What is it about them that is showing up in a way that maybe is not aligned to the way you see the world, but helps you get a better understanding of how to approach them, how to work with them. And I think sometimes just that better understanding, even if it doesn't lead to this like beautiful collaboration or whole new relationship, I think can help to alleviate some of those challenges and hopefully get from a place of avoidance to at least working together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Full circle on this conversation. I think, Joe, you mentioned collisions. And there are other, conflicts and frustrations. Would you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of thinking maybe we could kind of move into teams a little bit and talk about, interpersonal kinds of challenges or other types of challenges that are present, common on teams?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned earlier the I guess the popularity of this topic of conflict and feedback, particularly. I think that shows up not only interpersonally between folks who work on a team, but I think it's also part of an organization's culture. To what extent is it expected and supported that you're sharing feedback? And when I think about feedback, it's not just sharing criticism or things that need to be better, but it's also sharing what's going well and what's good. And I found that I think strength spotting and building that into the culture of a team can be a really powerful way to do that. So there are a few teams I'm thinking about from a workshop series that I've led that have actually integrated practice of strength spotting into existing team routines. So thinking about so many teams have a weekly standing meeting. A lot of organizations do let's do shout outs or let's do kudos or some practice like that. There's a ready-made opportunity there to integrate the language of character strengths to spot and appreciate what's good in others. And so I found that to be really powerful for a number of the teams that I worked with.
Well, I just want to hop in and mention that an organization I used to work at, for those of you who use Teams, Teams has that praise capability and you can actually customize that. So we actually put the strengths icons up and we customized with the strengths icons and then we're able to strength spot via Teams. And it was such a great way to kind of keep to be able to strength spotting in person is awesome. So many of us work remotely these days. So being able to do that no matter where we were, and kind of, on the fly in meetings, it was great. It's a beautiful way to kind of recognize someone and lift up the language and the practice at the same time.
I love that we're talking about strength spotting because I feel like a broken record, but I always talk about strength spotting all the time, individuals and in groups, when there's conflict, when there isn't conflict, when there's stress, when there isn't stress. It's just for me one of these practices that is just so simple and so basic and so foundational. And it kind of ties in. I wanted to share an example of working with a team from my experiences. And the challenge was in something that you talked about, Joe, a little bit earlier, implementing change seamlessly into existing practices, right? So even the smallest change can be hard to integrate or to create a new practice that fits that people have time for. And so this team was trying to implement or integrate a strength spotting practice into their team meeting. And weeks went by, weeks and weeks and weeks, and it wasn't getting done. And the reasons that I heard were, we're too busy, we don't have the time, our team agendas are already overflowing and too full. It would be put on hold because of other priorities, on and on and on. And the practice was simple. It was just starting with, every person talks about one thing that went well in the last week or since their last meeting, and then and then they would be strength spotted. Name a strength that, you saw in this person as they described their accomplishment. And so they wanted to integrate this practice. It wasn't that they were intentionally, openly resisting this. They had decided they wanted to do this, and they had experienced the benefits of this when we did it in our team meetings. And so they were on it, but realized that the situation called for creativity. And how can we, be really creative about going about integrating this practice? And in this situation, the team profile came in handy. Now, for those of you out there who aren't familiar with the team profile, it's an aggregate of all the team members' signature strengths. So if you picture like a PowerPoint chart with a bar chart with the strengths along the horizontal axis, how many team members have appreciation of beauty and excellence as a signature strength, and so on. And so it shows shared strengths, it shows where there are gaps and so on in strengths on the team. And at first, we were able to identify that no one on the team had creativity as a signature strength. Maybe this is contributing to the current problem that we're facing. Next, we went to their lesser strengths. And sure enough, it turned out that most of the team had creativity in the bottom three. Interesting. The plot thickens. So, this was, to me, sort of indicative of a little bit of what might be explaining this problem. And so we found someone with a strong middle strength of creativity, and this person volunteered to come up with a couple of possible solutions and pitch them to the team. And they ended up trying both of them, and they picked one. So, this using a unique strength of a team member and identifying who has these unique strengths and letting them lead with these strengths, giving them opportunities to do so can make a huge difference. I could have jumped in myself and just said, do it this way. But they came up with their own solution and found a way to make it work. And once they got it in place, boom, it was done. And they figured out how to do it using that lens of strengths.
Jane, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I do, and Joe, you mentioned this as well. I can't emphasize enough the power of embedding strengths practices in what already exists and or building on what exists as opposed to kind of trying something completely new for the very reason that you just mentioned, Jane. It frequently gets, deprioritized. So, for example, Joe, when you were talking earlier about challenges among teams, and Jen, I love that call out of kind of how do we, by doing the team chart, by looking at, there's also a great tool within the pathway, the VIA pathway, the two-factor balance graph, which looks at kind of different ways that we show up, kind of, intrapersonal, interpersonal, heart and mind, and kind of where do I fall in that? And then, so it's back for me, it's back to self-awareness. There's that, when we get into conflict, right? It's those practices of pausing and reflecting. And Joe, when you were talking before, I was thinking, there's just this process of stop, right? I just take a moment and I pause. I search for strengths. I think more broadly. I observe, are people underusing or overusing strengths, including myself, right? And then I push toward progress. So really kind of thinking about kind of how do the team, how do we all kind of show up together, and then because we all want a positive well, I shouldn't say all of us, but the vast majority of folks, we all want to get to a great place, right? It's just that we're all different, so sometimes it's going to collide.
Yeah, and you mentioned that stop tool, the stop for dealing with conflict. I learned this from you, Jillian, actually, to use the same tool, the pausing, the looking at the bigger picture, what strengths are in action, and so on. and coming up with maybe a reframed way of moving forward using strengths. I learned to use this for myself as sort of a tool to check myself before I have a difficult conversation, or sort of a not an after the fact kind of thing when there's conflict, but when I feel like conflicted or frustrated about, a message that I have to deliver or a person that I have to talk to, and I have these preconceived ideas of, who that person is, why they did what they did, and so on. It sort of helps me to take a beat and take a step back and really be a little bit more objective and put myself, sort of right before I head into this conversation. And I think that's true with leaders when they're, delivering messages and so on, that it's just a way to kind of pause, reflect a little bit and get grounded in strengths before tackling these, challenging conversations or difficult situations.
And I want to jump on the stop train for a moment because I really also like the tool, and I love acronyms. I think they're actually really helpful for remembering different important practices. The part of the stop framework or the acronym I'd like to highlight is the T, about thinking more broadly. And I think, and I love what you said, Jane, about sometimes use it for yourself. Like I need to actually apply this to myself and where I am right now. It's oftentimes applied as a way to work through conflict with another person. But I think on that latter piece, working through conflict with another person, I think we've all had, I'm sure, interactions in the workplace with folks that maybe kind of rubbed us the wrong way, or maybe someone said something that didn't sit well. And I've had these experiences personally. Like we have them. And I think frequently if you're under stress, which if you're there are lots of reasons why folks may be under stress in the workplace, and especially now if you're working, again, I work with nonprofits, and it's a really challenging time for nonprofits right now in the US. And I think sometimes when conflict is arising or certain actions are apparent, I try to think more broadly about the context in which someone is working. What are the pressures they're facing? What might be leading them to act, to respond, or engage in a way that is outside of the norm, where maybe they are overusing a strength in a way that is leading to some level of conflict with me, or maybe underusing a strength, for instance. But I really think that pause, I think it allows us to give people a little bit of grace as well, right? So maybe this is coming from a place, it's not necessarily coming from a bad place. It's coming from a place of stress. It's coming from a place of burnout. Maybe it's coming from a place of things happening outside of work that are causing someone to respond or act in a different way. So I really think that think more broadly piece is so essential. I think all four are important, but that one in particular, I think, really pushes us to see beyond our more limited perspectives.
Mm-hmm. I want to note we're talking about all these really positive, glowing examples. I also want to mention just a little bit on the flip side that, these things don't always work out with the beautiful, wrap it up in a bow kind of ending. Not everything works for every situation. And so important to remember that these are a lot of tools for the toolbox. And I like to, try things and before rolling them out and making sure that people respond. And sometimes they do. And sometimes, there are occasions where it's just not the right fit, or it's not the right timing, or the situation just doesn't work.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you all so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone else did as well. We'll move into some Q&A from some of the questions we've heard from our group in terms of trying to get at least represent all those 400 questions to the best of our ability. I loved so much what you all had to share about the fact that, when we're seeking change, that can feel really overwhelming. But I heard you all say time and time again, there's a small step you can take. And what we know from our own research at VIA, as well as research around the world, is that when we see and apply strengths in the workplace and we embed those in our practices, we can dramatically change engagement, performance, and other measures of well-being. So those small steps can really add up to significant change. We know that and we can talk to people about it. But when it comes to actually getting people engaged in change, that can still be tough. And so as consultants working with organizations, what do you find is essential in terms of getting buy-in from leaders or from the organization? Or what do you think are the most important, most compelling components of that?
I can start, and then I would love to hear thoughts from Jane and or Joe. I think there is obviously there's the research, right? There's, kind of foundational is at some point in time you're sharing with folks, here's the data that shows it works. I typically don't start with that. I typically actually start with what problem are you trying to solve? And because one of the things I love about the strengths work, and I know that folks, I've learned from VIA, is that strengths aren't the end in and of themselves. Strengths are the vehicle to get you to where you want to go, right? And so, what's the problem that you are trying to solve? And let me share with you how strengths can support that, right? And that's a beautiful conversation to have with folks. And more often than not, absolutely, by the end of that conversation, people are hungry for more. So
Yeah, it's great.
yeah.
Joe or Jane, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can jump in. And I love what you said, Anne, about strengths being a vehicle that can be applied to so many different challenges. I think the other piece to think about when, if you're launching change or kind of engaging in some sort of a change process, is who is involved in that. And there are certainly different strategies and frameworks for approaching a change process in an organization. And likely everyone who's a part of this webinar has been a part of many different change processes in different ways, shapes, and forms and levels of success. But I've found that one of the most effective ways to get started, Jillian was talking about this idea of like even a small step matters. I think change can sometimes feel so overwhelming and so big. Is to find out who are your champions in the organization who you can tap into. And it's not always the same. It shouldn't always necessarily be the same people. I think we probably all have worked in teams where anytime there's a new opportunity, there's the same 5 or 6 people who always raise their hands and they're going to lead the way on whatever it may be. But thinking if you're in a position to be able to lead, kind of the implementation of some of these practices, who are the folks in the organization who need to be involved in that process, who carry a level of influence in the organization, who are going to be enthusiastic, who are going to ask good questions, and start there. And I think that's different from, sending out an email or having a big Zoom meeting or having a huge meeting. And, certainly you can take that kind of that big bang approach and announce a big initiative in that way. But I think starting with a group of folks who are really committed and passionate is a great way to get started, and really building their buy-in and getting clear on their roles in the change process is what I've found to be most effective.
I would just add, on a practical level, I think of, what makes it hard to get buy-in. In my experience, things that Ann and Joe have touched on, and also when people don't understand the vision or it's not communicated clearly, what are we doing and why now? That kind of thing. I think that can affect buy-in. So, make it clear, make it, spread the word about, the what and the why. And then also, people have concerns and objections, right, to change. And when those concerns fester and don't get aired and heard and understood, they continue. So I think that really hurts buy-in, the possibility for buy-in. So really listening to people and hearing any concerns and objections, not that they're going to be necessarily addressed or resolved. Maybe they will be, maybe not, but at least when people feel heard, they can often move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, answering those 4 questions that people always ask, starting with what's in it for me and answering that through the lens of strengths. Well, it's an opportunity to use your love of learning. It's an opportunity to help us in terms of your appreciation of beauty and excellence, or bringing the best of yourself to this change process as an invitation can really dramatically change that. And just building on Joe, what I think you were saying, the notion of identifying those folks and looking at them as a team of change, what their profile looks like, and what you're going to dial up. It's just great. I love hearing your responses. So we also know, I'll shift gears a little bit. We had lots of questions about leadership and how strengths play into the leadership role. And we know, of course, that leaders have an outsized influence on their organizations, directly and indirectly. Recent research is talking to us about the fact that they're more important in people's lives than possibly their doctors, their therapists, or even their significant others. So we know that what you experience at work and that spillover effect research, you are taking home to your families and out into the world. So they play a critical role in our lives and our world, truly. So I'm curious what you think is the opportunity for leaders in particular to access a strengths-based approach. What does that look like? What was the first thing that you would encourage them to do? Who you've worked with who's really had a shift in their leadership to a more strengths-based approach, and kind of what happened in their organization?
I'll jump in and kick this off. I feel pretty strongly about this. That I think leaders, the best first step that they can take is to understand their own strengths and be aware of them, and know how they and feel confident in them. And I don't just mean the doing strengths of leaders, like the visioning and strategy and decision making and so on, but their character strengths. For instance, I'm working with an executive who is number one strength is humility. And this person this is a coaching client. They came to me for coaching because they don't feel confident in themselves as a leader. And one of the things that we did is they said, people tell me that I'm too kind, I'm too humble, I'm not aggressive enough, and so on. But we were able to go through lots of examples of when that balanced use of humility was really beneficial for them, for their team, for their organization. And then we talked about maybe some examples when there was maybe a little underuse or overuse, excuse me, of humility, a little bit too much humility, and what other strengths might be beneficial. But gaining that confidence in themselves of their own strengths and how that makes them unique as leaders, and and then modeling those for other people in their organization. I think that's where, I don't know, that's probably where I would start.
Jane, I'll build on that. I think an example that has come up so many times when we talk about leadership, where I've been in rooms full of people who are in formal leadership positions, like school system leaders or principals or nonprofit executives or whatever, and folks are going through their survey results, and leadership is not one of their signature strengths, or maybe it's even one of their lesser strengths. I've had that happen before, where someone is just totally thrown off. How can it be that I'm in a formal leadership position? I am leading. I think I'm doing pretty well, but this is telling me that leadership, in fact, is not one of my top strengths. What I think is, and I feel pretty strongly about this as well. Certainly the leadership character strength is important. It's one of the 24. It's a very specific type of leadership, of organizing folks around a shared objective and moving people forward towards that goal. But it is not I don't think it's essential to be in a leadership position. I think the humility example you gave is perfect. I mean, some people might actually see humility being at tension in some ways with leadership. And so what I've told folks in these positions, and anytime I talk about strengths in the context of leadership, it's about, how do you show up authentically as a leader in your top strengths? What does it look like for you to lead from a place of humility? What does it look like for you to lead from a place of judgment, from love, et cetera? And really getting deep into, what is it? When have you been successful? When have you generally, if you reflect on when you've been most successful or felt most successful as a leader, you probably are bringing those top strengths forward and maybe weren't even conscious of it. So it's helping people really embrace and then lean into those top strengths in that leadership position instead of feeling like they have to be someone else or do something else. And that has resonated with a lot of leaders I've had a chance to work with.
Yeah. Anne, did you want to add anything before I jump on? Move on.
Yeah, I would just add, because I completely agree with everything Jane and Joe said. And I think that in addition to kind of that self-awareness, the other piece that I get asked for all the time from leaders is how do I give strength-based feedback? Like, I don't know how to do that, right? So, that's one of those things. So everything from thinking about kind of, what we know about the science of recognition and that kind of 5-to-1 ratio, 5 positives to every, kind of constructive feedback that you give. I think about, there's a great tool in, again, the learning pathway, SBI around strengths-based feedback, as well as the strengths compass for leaders in the VIA pathway. So, thinking through kind of how, being intentional, being again self-aware about how often I'm giving feedback, how often I'm giving strength-based versus constructive feedback. So creating that kind of psychologically safe place for it. And then what are just those simple tools that I as a leader can use to support me in doing that have been huge for a lot of the leaders that I work with.
Awesome. Again, I think we could just take that one topic and spend the rest of this afternoon talking about it. I really appreciate your thoughtful responses. So I've heard you talking about some really specific interventions, right? There's strength spotting that can happen, and you can institutionalize that in your organization or systematize that when it comes to meetings or when it comes to other conventions that are already in the organization that you can simply add them into. I've heard you talking about using team charts when you're looking at the team and how it performs and how you want to draw out the best in people is really specific anchors for utilization, or even how a leader looks at building her team or her organization, and from whom she wants to draw what. In terms of strengths-based feedback and the collisions that might happen in that, or the synergies that might happen in that, super important. I've heard you talking about some, critical tools there, both SBI as well as STOP, in terms of let's get our heads right before we enter a difficult conversation. So I appreciated all of those really practical, real world grounded examples. I want to ask you one more that's both of those things together, which is, again, the more we can build a strengths-based approach into things that already exist, the more likely we are to have change that sustains. Okay? So for most organizations, one of the embedded practices is to have a performance review. Some people call it a learning and development conversation. I think that's the more modern expression of that convention. But I'd love to hear if you all have had any experience approaching those kinds of typical organizational conventions through a strengths-based lens in terms of really doing a strengths-based performance review, particularly when it comes to speaking to colleagues that are having performance challenges.
I can kick us off. So I recently worked with an organization, and that was one of their questions, really, how do we do that? And they had actually tried to do it in the past and had been unsuccessful. So the question becomes, how do we do it in a way that feels that we can be successful? And so what we did, again, I think it goes to your point, Jillian and Jane and Joe, you have said this too about embedding, right? So what we did was we took their existing performance review process and we took the strengths compass from VIA and we looked at them side by side and we said, which aspects of this strength compass feel right to you? What feels, so, and we did kind of an audit of what was working and not working about their current performance review process. So we made some tweaks. We would have probably made some tweaks just to that as well, but then really embedded a number of aspects from the strength compass without this wholesale kind of, oh, now we're doing this, right? And I'm happy to say I had a conversation with them recently, and people were talking about it was just time for annual reviews and performance. And one of the leaders on the phone said, it made my work, the review so easy. I've never, because not only did they introduce kind of the strengths into it, which was incredibly powerful, but they introduced just regular conversations along the way and kind of regular updates around kind of, where am I in terms of meeting goals and expectations? You've already had those hard conversations if you needed to have them, right? You've already recognized all the great stuff that's going on. So when it came to the end of the year, they were kind of like, took me a few minutes to put it together, and woo, we're like really great. So, and that's what you want it to be, right? You want it, and so it was, those are the kinds of wins that I think you're looking for. And so it really is about taking kind of what the organization needs and what they have, and kind of what we know from the science works from a strength-based perspective, and really marrying them up in a way that is transformative.
Just
And
have about,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. And I'll jump on that briefly and just, I think this topic of performance reviews or learning and development conversations, I think a lot of people have negative associations with them. I think depending on what your experience has been and where you've worked, oftentimes it can feel like a deficits focused conversation. A lot of times people are really nervous for them. It can feel like a one-way conversation, oftentimes, of a manager to a direct report. There are a lot of ways that it can go wrong. So you just think about the difference between, taking an evaluative approach, or here are the places where you need to improve in the coming year or the coming quarter, or whatever the frequency is. Just a simple shift of saying, what strengths have you been able to use in this past period of time, and what has the impact been? How can we do more of that? Like, just that simple question. People want to be seen and valued and appreciated for the good that they bring to an organization, to a team, to a community. And I think just a question like that, or here's a goal that you're working towards this coming year. What are the strengths that what are the strengths that you're going to bring forward in helping you work towards that goal, and how you bring that strength forward, and then following up on that. Those don't require a tremendous amount of additional time. It's just a shift in the perspective, and I think that can change people's experience and orientation to those types of conversations. I've seen that happen in lots of different places.
Yeah, great. Jane, did you want to add anything?
I really learned something from you, Anne. That's a really great idea. I think I'm filing that away in my mind. Just real quickly, one of my clients has an employee who's going through, has performance issues and is going through the formal process. They have a special name for it. And my client has introduced the language of strengths into their conversations, just quite simply. And just having done that, it is kind of shifting the conversations a little bit. They're reporting that the conversations are a little bit more open and objective. The defensiveness is down a little bit. There's more authentic conversation about, do you really want this function, this role? Is this the right fit for you? And kind of from a caring human place, right? Instead of, this is wrong and that's wrong. So it's just kind of on a real granular level. It's just shifting kind of the process a little bit.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic point to end this bit of the conversation on, because when we think about strengths and a strengths-based approach, sometimes it can be, oh, you just aren't going to face the hard things. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. It gives us a very powerful way to face the challenges head on, in a way that we're fueled by the very best of what's possible for us, instead of from a deficit base, which of course doesn't give us the kind of energy we need to really power through the difficult things and to find the best in our partners, our colleagues, to realize those things together. So I think that is so, so, so critical, Jane, that this work is powerful, meeting the demands that we face. And it's not about skirting them or moving around them or looking the other way, but it's addressing them head on. So thank you for that. So we've had so many questions in the chat, in addition to those very few that we've been able to share this afternoon. There's one that I want to address just ever so quickly before I turn it back over to Alicia, because it's come up a number of times and it frequently comes up in these sessions. The difference between VIA and Gallup strengths finders. Very quickly, I will share, we look at that really in three different ways. One is that essentially VIA are the primary building blocks, if you will, whereas the Gallup strengths are really composites of those building blocks. So if we think of something like WOO that shows up in a Gallup's survey, it would really be the combination of the building blocks of something like zest and social intelligence within VIA's prevalence. So that's one way to think about it. Another differentiating factor is that we think about VIA as the who you are versus what you do. So it's present across all of the segments of your life versus simply confined to your work life. And then finally, and what I think is potentially the most beautiful thing about this work is that in fact, it shows you how you are unique in the world. There's 1 in 124 or 1 in 1 sextillion chance that you will share your profile with somebody else, so you truly are unique in what you offer to the world. But it also shows you how you are indeed connected to all of the world, because you possess all of those 24 strengths just as everyone else does. So it's not that you don't possess those things at the bottom of your profile, but rather they're just lesser strengths for you. So in a very quick nutshell, that's how we sum that up in terms of the differences. And just because it's come up so much, I just want to share that ever so quickly with everyone. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alicia, and she is going to wrap us up for today. But I will say my thank you now to the three of you for being with us, and for all of those who have joined on the call. Just such a pleasure to know that there's so many people interested in and truly thinking about what it looks like to flourish as individuals, groups, teams, and across our world.
Thank you, Jillian, and thank you to Jane, Joe, and Ian. We just really appreciate you and all of your wisdom. And if you have more questions, make sure that you just let us know and we'll do our best. But I do want to go over, a lot of people asked in the chat, for more information about workplaces at their best. There are 2 QR codes on here, depending on the pathway that makes the most sense for you. But a lot of what we were talking about is featured in our consultant pathway. In fact, we have a couple people on the call today who are in our current cohort. And so we're really excited they're here. But that is for professional expertise certification as a consultant. And so you can see that QR code, and we're offering currently a 20% discount. So you can use that QR code and then use the code transform20 to get 20% off of that. And then the second one is if you're looking more for growth as an individual, you can do our learning path, which also features many of these tools. And we are running the same code and discount for that. We'll also be sending this in our follow-up email, so don't worry if you didn't get it right now. But I did see some phones go up, so hopefully you were able to. And then we do just want to say again, please connect at any time on LinkedIn with any of our speakers today. They would be glad to connect with you. And we'll also be sharing this in the email debrief. So don't worry if you're not able to get their handles quickly. But if you're really zesty and fast, you can grab them really quick right now. And to just kind of conclude for today, we really want to say thank you so much for joining us. And so we have a little virtual gift for you. It is an activity. It's an adoption of Character Strengths 360, if you're familiar with that activity from Dr. Ryan Nemec. But we have it adapted for the workplace specifically. And this tool includes 3 pages of kind of an activity you can do inside of your organization or to support an organization. So that will also come out in the email, but we wanted to let you know it is coming your way and it will be there. And so thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you all and all of your time. Thank you again.